Fellow. Research Fellow, Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory, University of Belgrade, and a Professor of Political Philosophy at the American University of Paris. Then Ivan Vojevoda, Permanent Fellow of the Institute for Human Sciences, IVM in Vienna, Slobodan G. Markovich, Professor at the Faculty of Political Science of the University of Belgrade, and Associate at LSE Ideas London. And David Makarin, third-year student at the Faculty of Political Science of the University of Belgrade. So thanks again to our panelists for joining us today. Really wonderful that you had time to talk to us. And before we start, I would like to also give space to Balázs Trencseny, professor at the Central European University, to introduce the project STEPE.
So I will be very short because the interesting thing now is obviously to have this roundtable, but I would like just to recall for those who are new in this format that this is a roundtable organized by the project STEPE. It has a longer name, and STEPE is of course a joke. So it's basically a project about transnational circulation of political, ideological, cross currents in East and Western Europe. The participating partners, I will just send in the group chat the list of the institutions, but it's Institute of Political Science at Leipzig University, Central European University, Democracy Institute, New Europe College in Bucharest, and the main hosting institution is Centre Marc Bloch Berlin. And the idea is to kind of study this political radicalization and political transfers through a conversation of different institutions and through a group of junior fellows with whom we are trying to put together a kind of broader intellectual map of how right-wing, left, new right, and different other transnational ideological frames are moving between East and West, and rather than just perceiving it as the traditional perspective of West-East transfers that has been, of course, very much projected on all these transfers, we are trying to look at the East-West and the kind of more East-East and West-West conversations as well. And of course, I mean, in the context of the last week in global politics, this is not a surprising approach, but obviously something that we are trying to reflect on what is going on in the world there, where Trump is inspired by Putin and inspires Putin and all that. So I think the idea is somehow to talk about this and to kind of produce new type of knowledge in this kind of situated transnational conversational style. And we also decided to have a couple of roundtables about particular events where this transnational aspect is very important, but it's not the only aspect of political developments. And we had a session about the recent Romanian Constitutional Court ruling, which probably most of you know was a very interesting and very debated decision to exclude for the time being the radical right-wing candidate who was clearly using all kind of very complex and not very legal ways of manipulating the public opinion. But then obviously the decision, Constitutional Court decision, is also very debated. We are now having this Belgrade protest session, and we hope to organize similar sessions also about Ukraine and what's going on in the kind of global discussion about the future of Ukraine in the next couple of weeks. So I would like to just once again greet you in the name of the project organizers, and you will see some of the other group members commenting or entering the discussion, but some of our colleagues cannot be here for various reasons. So I'm passing the greeting in the name of the whole broader team. So thanks once again, and back to Una.
Thank you, Balázs. And I would just like to very briefly say about the format. So we will have our panelist presenters. I also copy-pasted now, if you can see also the titles of the presentations. And then we would have comments from Dietmar Müller, a historian of comparative history of European cultures and societies at the University of Leipzig. And we will then open the discussion. We will also have space for participants, panelists also comment on each other's presentations. And then we will also open, of course, space for questions from the audience. So feel free to write your questions in the chat box, and we will then read them towards the end and ask. So thank you so much, and let's start. So Zona Zaric will talk about the transformative power of emotions, emancipatory potential, and political mobilization. Zona, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Una, and thank you to the project for making this conversation possible. A special thank you also to my colleague from the Institute, Petar Žarković, who connected us with your project. I'm very happy to have this occasion to have a conversation about something that we are all living through, and yet unable still to fully formalize, define, conceptualize, and therefore be able to better contribute to its success. So often we have been in this kinds of situation, whether the COVID pandemic comes to mind, where we are all intensely living through something and yet trying to lead our daily lives uninterrupted. So I believe that the occasion to combine the two and our professional expertise is truly wonderful, and I'm very grateful for this occasion. If I understood correctly, I have about 15 minutes. Una and I discussed a lot while preparing whether it would be more of a roundtable vibe to have slides, not to have slides. So in the end, I will share just 6 slides with you and maybe tell you about what I'm thinking, what I'm reading when I'm trying to conceptualize the protests. And then go to my talk if that is okay as an order. I welcome all questions and discussion with the other panelists, and I believe that the order of presentation will be quite complementary, at least I hope so. A few words about myself before getting into the topic. The reason I believe Una thought that I could contribute something to this is that I have worked quite significantly on the political significance of emotions in general, and particularly compassion. I have a degree in law and international relations and a doctorate in philosophy. And from my master's degree, I have analyzed the movements in France after the terrorist attacks in 2015 under the slogan "Je suis Charlie," and the movement of solidarity and the emotions that created and consolidated. And then in my PhD in philosophy, it was mostly about the concept of compassion and its general usability in politics. So my references, you will see, are mostly those that enable us to take emotion seriously, to move out of the binary emotion versus reason, to see emotion as cognitive processes, not only ignited by interior events, but also exterior, whether you're thinking of John Dewey or Axel Honneth, Martha Nussbaum as well, are all very standard and essential references for the topic. What is currently going on in Serbia is quite specific and maybe the best terrain for such exploration and proof. So in order to better structure my talk, I will now share with you the slides that I have prepared so that it gives you a sort of overview of my talk. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so the title, as Una read it, is The Transformative Power of Emotions and Its Emancipatory Potential. Some of the discussions I've been having with my colleagues at the Institute and also intimately with friends and family is the usual people from Yugoslavia and not just that region are familiar with. As soon as there is protest of such intensity and grandeur and numbers, we all either divide ourselves in the camps of optimists or pessimists, and how do we talk about it? When is resistance powerful enough for us to be optimistic? Do we dare hope yet again, or will this again dissipate? And what strike me as interesting to start reading up on, whether from references in philosophy or psychoanalysis, is precisely this idea. Do we, in general, in life, resist only when we know we are strong enough to overcome and attain something concrete and planned in advance? Or is resistance just as important, if not more so important, when it's not predetermined and when we are not in a position of power. So the author that I first stumbled upon when I was researching some of my previous work on something related to what's going on today is Clarice Lispector, Ukrainian-born, Brazilian, whose writings you might be familiar with in her particular style. And what she talks about is the similar struggles in Brazil that she experienced and lived through and wrote about in her work Agua Viva from 1973. She says, freedom is not enough. What I desire does not have a name yet. Serbian protests are not just about changing the government. They are inventing a new form of political subjectivity, is what I will try to claim in my talk. And unlike previous movements that we've witnessed, even the most recent ones, this is not a fight for power, but it's the first ever fight to dismantle structures of domination without proposing new forms of power or wanting to regain power. The emotional intensity of these protests, I will talk about that as well, the tears, the grief, the mourning, and how all of these emotions and emotional acts are in themselves very radical acts of defiance and resistance. So in order to back up the philosophical references of emotions, I've also went back to Lacan and Freud, and I will use a little bit from Freud's Mourning and Melancholia and from Lacan's 20th Seminar from 1973, book 20, the seminar. Lacan could explain what we are living through this idea of the symbolic order that is familiar, known, the law, the state, the hierarchy, that once it's disrupted and new claims are made, emotional control is also disrupted. So the power of vulnerability in Serbian protests precisely demonstrates this. Julia Kristeva as well will be a reference in the way that she explains that a semiotic rupture happens precisely when we are unable to fully formulate it in language. And of course, the essential Freud about mourning as necessary for transformation. And then if we think about our region and all that has not been mourned or not properly mourned, there is no surprise that there is a sort of accumulated need for precisely this, that these tears that we are seeing in the streets and emotion are precisely proof that we have lived through a trauma and that they're a form of liberation. I will then try to explore with you, and I very much welcome questions here, something that I hope to prove and is a hypothesis I'm currently working in, that there's something very specific about Generation Z. So those born up between the late 90s and 2012, I believe. Those are my students. So my experience also very much is humbling whenever working with them, how different it is from my generation in the sense that they will not just respect hierarchy because it's given, because there's a certain master discourse, as Lacan again would say, between the professor and the student or any other hierarchy, but will respect it if this hierarchy proves itself able to listen and able to exist in a sort of horizontality, able to show care as well. So I believe there's something quite essential in this recognition that hierarchy isn't the way they organize their being in the world, in the public sphere, that could help us comprehend how this movement is, for example, not talking to one authoritarian figure or multiple, but is seeking to talk to institutions and to horizontalize the movement, and also how they're not putting themselves in advance. Whenever we hear any of the students speaking, whether in social media clips they create or whether when invited on TV platforms, they always are self-effacing. They never want to be the face of the protests or remembered by something they've said or done, but they speak for their university, for the movement, and so on. So this is something quite specific and unique to the generation, that they do not seek to seize power, but quite the contrary, they seek to dissolve it, even in moments where they could own it. Some references that I will be using is also from Ehrenberg in 1998, that Generation Z is done with the hyper-individualist struggle for status, that they rather embrace horizontal organizing and collective care. Also Winnicott, and how actually the protests themselves are a holding environment. Those of you familiar with his works will think of the holding environment of early childhood, but precisely maybe if it was lacking, then this space is their new holding environment. So this is a generation that has never seen institutions work for them. They are not fighting to fix the broken system, but to create something entirely new. And at the very end, I will focus on the specificities of the Vučić regime. Is it just an authoritarian regime? Is it a dictatorship? How does it work and function? Why does, I'm quoting the international community because it's quite undefined what it is, support the Vučić regime, and then some concerns about the future. So when it comes to the Vučić regime, I've been following works, whether from sociologists, historians, and have been quite impressed with a recent work by our sociologist Todor Kulic, who explains this through an idea of moral autocracy, of detaining the idea of being morally superior to others, as well as maybe what Srećko Horvat talks about when he talks about that this generation has had more education in the streets during the 3 months of protests than they had in their former formal educational systems. So all of this will contribute to understanding the potentials of the movement, but focusing just on the regime itself, I will talk about how this state capture and media control has led in a way to the movement happening. Because the judiciary, police, and regulatory institutions serve political rather than public interests, there is this spark that focuses precisely on, we are not talking to you, the president, that encompasses in an authoritarian way all the usual separations of power, but we are talking to those institutions in a way that we want them back and functioning. Same goes for media control. We are witnessing, we have been for years flooded with propaganda, distractions, and now we're witnessing students, and thanks to social media, trying to ask for the national television, ask for coverage that is genuine, that will just reflect what is actually going on. And then striking is also the silence of the international community, so-called international community on these topics. And Lily Lynch has written a great article about this in Sidecar, the New Left Review's book. There's also the idea of clientelism. The state distributes selective economic aid, and how this keeps citizens dependent on Vučić's rule. And of course, define strategies in place for many years now to silence all opposition or to completely delegitimize it. So why would such a regime be tolerated? And what is interesting, the students are not asking explicitly for any kind of external savior. They're not in an autocolonial moment of asking to be saved. They're their own saviors, our own saviors. And very much, I'm sure, aware of the fact that Vučić is seen as a stabilizing force in the Balkans, more, at least currently, preferred to a support towards real democratization, whether it's Russia and China, who have economic interests, whether it's the EU, Western corporations, Serbia, as long as it's perceived as cheap labor force with deregulated industries, it seems that the Vučić regime will not be exposed through too much trouble externally. And then I will conclude, and hopefully with you in the debate later, what is the potential? How do we see the potential of this movement? How can it become more concrete? Does it maybe even have the potential for transnational solidarity? We've seen for the first time in a long time the evocation of a general strike, a full economic shutdown that could force the regime into genuine crisis. That hasn't been used in political discourse in a very long time in our region. And these are all the potentials that I will address. I will stop sharing my screen. In the time that I have, I just wanted to share with you. Una, how much time do I have left?
You have some time left. You can, yeah, you can. Great. Feel free.
Have I successfully stopped sharing my screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right, great. So my talk I have entitled "The Transformative Power of Emotions," and through it, I've tried to examine this particular political resistance that's happening in Serbia, and also the broader regional support in the territories of former Yugoslavia it has had and is continuing to have. These protests are what I will try to claim not merely political demands, but they are an eruption of long repressed grief and collective mourning. Therefore, they mark the birth of a new political subjectivity. This is something Martha Nussbaum has written about in her books about the theories of political emotions, where she argues that tears, anger, and solidarity are not passive reactions, but active forces that disrupt authoritarian control and forge new forms of collective agency. You've also seen that I will reference Lacan and Kristeva, and I forgot to mention Axel Honneth's theory of recognition that explores how this emotionally charged resistance breaks through traditional political categories as it moves beyond hierarchical leadership and towards a more radical, sort of post-hierarchical form of mobilization. And then towards the end, I will analyze how Aleksandar Vučić's hybrid authoritarianism is sustained by media control, economic clientelism, and international tolerance. Finally, I argue that this movement, far from being an isolated Balkan event, offers a blueprint for Europe's own democratic struggles, demonstrating that resistance is not only about political opposition, but about reclaiming emotional and moral agency in a world increasingly shaped by repression and disillusionment. So back to my original thoughts about resistance. It is just a personal opinion that there is beauty in whatever shape of resistance, no matter how small and insignificant or powerless, even when it stands against overwhelming power, and perhaps especially then. Beauty does not emerge in triumph, in the certainty of victory, but in the trembling moment of refusal, in the fragile, tear-streaked face that still dares to look power in the eye. And here I think about the beautiful photos that will commemorate these protests, I hope, for many years to come, maybe even in future textbooks. So the students' protests in Serbia have spread like wildfire across the region and different parts of the population, mobilizing this emotion of compassion, of solidarity, of support, because they contest something that mostly everyone in the region can relate to, and if not, like I said, in Europe as well. They don't just contest corruption and violence and the degradation of public institutions. They mark something far greater, this sort of birth of a new political subjectivity. This political subjectivity inspires me through the ways of Generation Z's radical rejection of hierarchy, performative ambition, and institutional obedience. So therefore, their resistance is not only an act of defiance or disobedience. What is interesting is that it's also at the same time, every time, an act of collective mourning, reparation, and transformation. And that's what makes it quite extraordinary that there's so much grief and so much emotion shared in the streets, as much as with the slogans. This movement is a sort of cry for the country's stolen future, the cry for the decades of violence, corruption, and broken promises. I have, like I said, really enjoyed reading a recent publication by our sociologist Dr. Kulic, who refers to this as moralokratia, a sort of moral autocracy, where the government uses a sort of performative morality by shaming and humiliating. And therefore, because it's used to this mechanism, it shows itself right now as completely incapable of comprehending this particular type of resistance, because it is not built on calculation or moralizing attitudes. It's built on raw, ungovernable emotion. So Kulic, in his work, explains how Vučić regime's political strategy heavily relies on the utilization of moralization as a tool of governments. The state does not merely impose order through laws and repression. It frames political discourse as a moral battle, dividing society into patriots and traitors, always a binary that serves to delegitimize opposition, to justify repression, and sustain the leader's moral authority. So key to this strategy is a sort of ritualized public shaming, which then transforms any political opponent into moral outcasts, where it strips them from any legitimacy and silence all dissent that could potentially follow. This weaponized morality functions as symbolic capital, to use terminology, because it benefits the ruling elite, while it reinforces a culture of submission at the same time. The media amplifies this moral polarization as it deploys emotionally charged language such as anti-Serbian scum, foreign mercenaries, traitors, and so on to fuel resentment and suppress any sort of meaningful political debate. However, the system carries an inherent risk. By sanctioning hatred in the name of virtue, it fosters a dangerous political climate where supporters believe they can attack the immoral with a clear consciousness, or the very pejorative name-calling, the ways we've divided ourselves into two parts, basically in the civil war, hopefully that are now seeing the common oppressor for what he or what it really is, instead of decades of being turned against each other. So this moral hegemony is facing an unexpected challenge. It's not coming from conventional opposition parties. It's not coming from outside. It's coming from a completely decentralized, emotionally driven student-led protest movement. Unlike previous demonstrations, which often faltered due to either cooptation or repression, this uprising has disrupted the moral economy of the regime itself. Students have already achieved this. They are rejecting the formulations of binaries, the good patriots versus evil opposition. They have introduced an entirely different, like an entire moral vocabulary where corruption, media terror, injustice, and dignity is what we are seeing prevail and what we are talking about. So this reversal has weakened the government's control over moral legitimacy, and it forces it now into an increasingly defensive position. Vučić is leaning further and further into moral absolutism. He's framing the crisis as a battle against enemies of the nation, yet this strategy, at least it's my opinion, is risking even more backfiring as more and more segments of society join the movement. The question is now whether this movement can expand beyond procedural grievances and whether it can integrate into a deeper socioeconomic demand, if it can form a cohesive force capable of transforming Serbia's political landscape rather than merely contesting. Like I've shown in the slides, because the regime does not function through solely brute force, but also through a very sophisticated system of institutional capture and media domination, external support. There is this maintenance of the illusion of democracy, controlling elections, courts, and an entire public discourse that ensures the grip on power remains unchallenged. This is where the main strength of the regime lies, and why every previous protest we have seen recently, whether it was against the electoral fraud, whether the environmental destruction or corruption, has been in a way outlasted or, let's say, absorbed. But meanwhile, the EU, Russia, China have all continued to tolerate this for their own strategic interests. So the question is also, and the light is turned towards the, again, so-called international community to see if they follow accordingly to what could be potentially a movement for Europe. I will now be brief in order not to take up more time, just a few words about the psychoanalytic inspirations that I found for better comprehending what we're going through. And that is most notably Mourning and Melancholia, 1917, Freud, where he says that can not be properly mourned will always return as unresolved trauma. So this way we can also perceive the protest as a vast collective mourning, as a movement that is exploding with long repressed grief, and it's emerging not just from Generation Z, even though I believe it started with them, but from a nation and a region that have carried silence as their inheritance. It's just that the Gen Z is the generation that is the one not willing to carry the silence, but to actually speak about it. And now we're seeing the sheer power of speaking about it and sharing the emotions that ensue. So as we are familiar, former Yugoslavia is a place where political trauma was not worked through, but was rather pushed under, repressed, denied, or even worse, rewritten in nationalist myths and authoritarian narratives. But Freud tells us that repression is never complete, that what we deny in history returns in the body, and this is what we're seeing in the public sphere today in Serbia and the region. It's returning in tears, in the voices crackling with emotion, and I even find it difficult to just talk about it in a very composed way. The other psychoanalytical reference I wanted to mention is Lacan in the Séminaire Livre 20, from 1973. He reminds us that this symbolic order of law, hierarchy, and institutional control only functions while it's capable, as long as it's capable to regulate emotion and contain them within pre-approved forms. But now when they're bursting out of those forms, or as Julia Kristeva says, a semiotic rupture is happening, the state's moralized and carefully curated performance of dominance is no longer viable. All right, so to wrap it up, why I believe that a new political subject is born with this post-hierarchical revolt in Gen Z is that what makes them different from the previous movements we've seen is that they do not want to take power. And this is what has many raising the question, but what after? What if there's no one to articulate? What if we don't have a strong enough opposition? What will happen to the movement? So of course I don't have answers to that, but I'm seeking to find those answers, and hopefully we can discuss this together. Is the generation that wants to dissolve power, that in their hands the protest is not something about seizing the reins of government or replacing one leader with another, is in a way playing a new game. And the question is who can follow, and if we can be at the level of being capable of following what is going on. And what is going on is a radical decentralization. It's about the networks they can form, about the collective rejecting the very premise of domination. This is what makes them so alien to their opponents, to political commentators that are still stuck in the old language of opposition, negotiation, and leadership. Here again, I mentioned Clarice Lispector, who was writing in the midst of Brazil's own cycles of repression when she says, "Freedom is not enough. What I desire does not yet have a name." What we're witnessing in Serbia is precisely this, a movement that does not fit into existing categories of politics because it's trying to invent something else. And I will finish with this idea of decentralization also on the international scene, because I firmly believe the movement is not just about Serbia. It's about any society going through long reigns of corruption, closure of public space, and so on. So therefore, our movements carry a possibility for something much greater. And Europe today is a continent in deep crisis. And it's not just a political or economic crisis, but it's also an emotional crisis. It's a continent that's divided between a sort of exhausted liberalism and a resurgent authoritarianism. It's trapped in narratives of decay and decline. It's haunted by the failures of the past. And so I wonder, what if the answer does not come from the usual centers of power? What if it does not come from Paris or Berlin, from Brussels or London, but if it comes from the Balkans, from the supposed periphery, from those who have already lived through the failures Europe is now facing? I believe there is an old arrogance in Western political thought that assumes history moves from west to east, that ideas, strategies, and futures are formulated in developed Europe and exported elsewhere. But here is something different, a movement that is emerging from the so-called margins, but is offering a new model, a model of resistance that Europe, I believe, desperately needs. So there's some other things I wanted to share, but I think I'm over my time, and I will look forward and wait for the discussion at the end. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Zona. This was very inspiring, and yeah, I'm sure we will have more time to discuss and talk in the next part of the panel. I would now like to welcome again Ivan Vojevoda and introduce his title. The title of his presentation is "We the People in Serbia, Vivere Civile, Vivere Libero." Thank you, Ivan.
Una, thank you very much, and great pleasure to be invited to be one of the speakers here today. I'll try and be as telegraphic and brief as I can, highlighting some of the moments. I think Zona said brilliantly a lot of very important things, so I think we'll build on what she said. Let me say that, quoting President Vučić yesterday, who was caught by a independent journalist asking about the relationships of his brother to criminal organizations that were revealed by Europol deciphering the application that criminals use. And he said that his brother had nothing to do with those criminals, but he immediately retorted And how much money did you receive from the criminal organizations called USAID and National Endowment for Democracy? So this is the overarching framework in which we are operating. Donald Trump and Elon Musk have declared USAID led by radical lunatic leftists. And so everything that USAID has done can now be used by the likes of Vučić to attack any independent civic organization, journalist, academic institution, and the like, just to give you a flavor of this atmosphere that we are living in. I'd like to pick up exactly, and thank you, Zona, for mentioning that, about the how political movement and ideas move like the weather from west to east. In fact, Yugoslavia was seen as basically the odd country out as the Berlin Wall fell, when everybody was moving in towards the quote unquote end of history and democracy. We were on the highway of identitarian and nationalist politics, and everybody thought that this was a total aberration. It just like now, it seems that we were the harbinger of things to come, of the appearance of far-right movements and of nationalism and identitarian politics that then spread through the West to America and backwards. And so maybe this is another signal that this very deep and broad and surprisingly unexpected movement that we're seeing in Serbia, which I think has a vast importance, and we're only seeing elements which, again, Zona has described, that might reverberate further westward. So again, a new wind coming from the east. I think part of the origin of this, of course, comes from the unsuccessful deep transformation of Serbian society after the fall of Milosevic through peaceful elections in 2000, defended in the streets on October 5th. But as we say back home, there was no real October 6th. There was no cleansing of society. And in many famous statements by Prime Minister Đinđić, whom you all know was assassinated later in 2003, he said, let's now see to it that we never have a type of Milosevic regime come back. Well, we were simply unsuccessful because we did get a regime. And so this is why we're seeing the breadth of this movement. And I would add to the term of mourning the term of cleansing. This is a cleansing of society of itself, because it has lived for 12 years under this regime, which everyone knew was corrupt. Everyone knew that it was clientelistic. You had to join this party that has, by all counts, about 700,000 members, a party that has more members than the Communist Party of Serbia had during Yugoslavia. So basically, you have to buy the lottery ticket to get a job with the party. You can live in a corrupt system. You can see that when they're reconstructing a street, they're doing it for the 6th time because they're creaming off the money. The cobblestones are not straight. You can trip on the cobblestones, maybe hurt yourself. Your car bumps, but there are no deaths. So after 12 years, when 15 innocent people die and 2 are basically disabled for life, then that explodes. And so this accumulated frustration of 12 years of everything that Zona described is an explosion. But then the addition is not just street marches, but actually a deeply democratic movement that appears from this young generation that we all thought was apolitical, apathetic, TikTokers who just wanted to get a diploma and leave. So my first conclusion is that Serbian society has a bright future. It has an incredible generation, eloquent, smart, creative, witty and peaceful, of course. These are peaceful demonstrations, and I think there's a general consensus that nobody wants a violent change of regime in the country. Of course, we don't know what will happen as we go forward. And I think a lot of research is already being done, but I think we have to look at the democratic substance of what is going on in the plenums, as they are called, in the way students are organizing. Given the political science and political philosophy background, you know, I wouldn't hesitate to compare this, all things being equal, to the Paris Commune or to what happened in the early days of the French Revolution, etc. This is a search for authentic democratic procedures where we, the people, are speaking out. To use that famous phrase from the American Constitution. And I think that is what we're going to see. Skipping over a number of things that I'd like to mention, I think we will address also in the Q&A what are the political ramifications of this? How does the movement, eternal question in social history, how does the social movement translate into politics? Because ultimately this will have to finish at the election booth. E.P. Thompson and his famous book, The Making of the English Working Class, I think is something that we have to look at when we look at books. And as both sociologists and political sociologists, you know, how do these movements then generate and transform societies? The political opposition is, to put it politely, is disjointed, cannot get its act together. Again, Zona described the ways in which Vučić has anesthetized and controlled through the media, clientelism and state capture, the way that the opposition operates. And so I think what is certain, and it needs to be put out there, I think it's obvious, Vučić is on the way out. The question is, how long is the exit going to last? Is it 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years? But he's definitely on the decline, and then it's a question of how do we all manage this decline, and how do we speed it up and keep it within the boundaries of institutional change, a revolutionary change, as the students said, revolution through evolution. I found that an interesting putting together of Edmund Burke and the French revolutionaries. But it goes to say that they are aware of the challenges that lie ahead. For now, the movement is determined, and I think with every statement of Vučić, and as you all know, he jumps out of our TV boxes or platforms at every second of the day, I think inspires them to be more determined, more courageous, and more perseverant in the goals to retake the life of democratic institutions. Finally and briefly, and Zona mentioned this also, the international aspect. Vučić has been clearly a very able politician, buying indulgences from the West that were managed. The most important one, I would say, beyond lithium, beyond buying French fighter jets, is the support to the Ukrainian defense effort and the export of thousands of artillery shells, Serbian artillery shells, that are killing Russian soldiers. Informally, it's about 2 billion euros or dollars worth. And the fact that this has been ongoing is seen by those in the West who support this regime as crucial to the efforts of Ukraine to defend itself from the Russian full-scale aggression and invasion. In the words of one US diplomat, we have 3 priorities. This is a statement of about a year ago: Ukraine, Ukraine, and Ukraine. And so looking at it from a a geopolitical aspect in this under the Biden administration. This was a key way in which Vučić was buying favors and ingratiating himself. As our friend and colleague Misha Glenny, who I see is here, said, Serbia leans westward. And I think that's one of the explanatory elements in why he is still seen. But this is radically changing, I think, with the unfolding of the student movement. And why do I, in this title, say, and I'll finish with that, talk about vivere libera and vivere civile? Of course, those of you who know your Machiavelli, it is his famous statement that this is what about the new age, what political modernity is about, is that the individual and the community in which he or she or they live is the desire to live freely and in a civil way. And I think that I recognize in what this movement has borne and is carrying exactly this fundamental desire of the modern human being to live in a civic and free way. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ivan, and this was really, really interesting. I'm sure we will have lots to talk about. Both there's a lot of questions also I will have, but let's move now to so Slobodan Markovich. His presentation is titled The Democratic Potential of the Student and Civic Protests in Serbia 2024-2025. Thank you, Slobodan.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes, okay. So I'll start with basically the year of 2000. I will just mention that Serbia was late in both political and economic transition, 1 decade late, due to the wars of Yugoslav succession. And it experienced 1 decade of authoritarian rule of Slobodan Milosevic. It is important to mention at the very beginning that the event that crucially challenged this rule of Slobodan Milosevic was also the student movement of 1996, 1997, and that movement is has been assessed by Leonard Cohen, who wrote, and by actually by John Lampis, sorry, who wrote the most famous history of Yugoslavia, as Serbia's finest hours since the democratic days of 1903, 1908. So John Lampy gave a very central role to what happened back then. And in terms of potentials for democratization of Serbia, I think that the new student movement already deserves the same epithet. What happened since 2000? First of all, there was a series of liberal pro-Western governments between 2000 and 2012. And in 2012, former hardcore nationalists came to power under the name Serbian Progressive Party. They were a splinter from the chauvinist and anti-Western Serbian Radical Party, whose leader was accused of war crimes and sentenced at the Hague Tribunal for ex-Yugoslavia. In this rebranded party, Aleksandar Vučić soon became an uncontested leader, and by 2014, when he became prime minister, he concentrated all powers in his hands, and Serbian non-consolidated democracy began to deteriorate. It means that Serbia's democracy never reached the status of consolidated democracies as Central European states did. And this is a characteristic of most of the countries of ex-Yugoslavia. Only Slovenia was happy enough to become a consolidated democracy. So since 2014, concomitantly with coming to power by Vučić, Serbia's status of non-consolidated democracy, so still a liberal democracy, but non-consolidated one, starts to deteriorate. International organizations that follow democratization of civil liberties detected a steep deterioration in democracy scores of Serbia since 2014, and the year 2018 was marked as the first year when Serbia lost the status of a free and democratic state, and when she descended to a lower category which is designated as hybrid, transitional, semi-authoritarian, semi-autocratic state, depending which typology you use. This system has another name. It's known as stabilitocracy, also a hybrid system that emerged particularly in the region of the Western Balkans, but is not confined to the Western Balkans. It came after the Greek economic crisis, and this system allegedly provides political and economic stability. It is also a hybrid system, neither a democracy nor an open autocracy, with very pronounced institutional deterioration, which factually leads to a captured state. Western countries put a blind eye when these stabilitocracies emerged, especially countries run by parties affiliated with EPP, European People's Party group. And basically what they argued was, okay, there is at least stability in the region. Researchers from Serbia were more critical than Freedom House and others, and they actually already in 2015 claimed that Serbia was no longer a democracy. The major result of more than 12 years of Vučić's rule is the fragmentation and marginalization of the political opposition and political parties in Serbia that are not members of the ruling coalition, but even he was successful to marginalize political parties that entered his own coalition other than his own party. And this overall concentration of power in his hands and introduction of a full-scale partytocracy was fully achieved in the period 2014-2016. So now the ruling party claims that it has 700,000 members, which is some 250,000 members more than the Conservative and the Labour Party in Britain together. And of course, Britain is 10 times bigger in terms of population, just to realize how big this structure is. And so we speak about 700,000 alleged members, because political marketing is used all the time. We never know which data are false, which data are correct. But if this is the case, we should compare it with usual 4 million voters. So it is about 17-18% of electorate that votes. So you have 18% of votes which are yours even before you start elections. And if you make this whole system, and if you basically ask from every registered member just to find one more member, you have 36% of electorate secured in advance. It is illustrative that in 2024, when the last local elections were organized, the political opposition did not attain control of a single municipality in Serbia. There is only one sub-municipality niche where the opposition is in power. And moreover, there is even a sub-municipal level of local autonomy in Serbia, even on that level, which no one was ever interested in, not even during Milosevic, not too many people were interested, but even on that level, the ruling party took the whole power. This is unprecedented and was not like that even during Milosevic. So when the student protest emerged, it emerged because results of the elections were contested. And one of the results of the student protest was that the opposition was able to actually take control of all the major towns in Serbia in '97. In December 2023, the last parliamentary elections were held in Serbia. A massive electoral fraud and irregularities were detected by EU observers, and the European Parliament adopted a resolution in Serbia in which various electoral irregularities were listed. So this is the background before the student movement appeared. What is at stake then in Serbia? What is at stake is democracy itself, that has been deteriorating since 2014 persistently, which has led to the current condition of hybrid state. Moreover, there has been a clear tendency of further autocratization and the visible trajectory leading Serbia towards the status of an autocracy, non-consolidated autocracy, if you want to use Freedom House categories. But if you use mathematical models used by VDEM Institute, Swedish VDEM Institute, the most famous institute for democratization in Europe, then they show that having in mind the number of episodes of autocratization in Serbia, mathematical models suggested before the student protest that this path towards autocracy was unlikely to be stopped. It was very likely that Serbia would become an autocracy. So what the first thing that what the student protest succeeded to reverse was this continuation of a very, very clear path to an open autocracy. We already heard that on November the 1st, the canopy of the recently renovated railway station Novi Sad fell. It killed 15 people. And the state first claimed that it had nothing to do with it. 3 weeks later, students of the Faculty of Dramatic Arts were beaten, and they organized blockade of their faculty. Revolted, they blocked the building, and by the end of 2024, so within 1 month, around 85 state faculties and colleges in Belgrade, Novi Sad, Niš, and Kragujevac were under blockade. After the students organized their rally on December the 22nd in Belgrade, with the participation of around 100,000 people, which is unprecedented in the last, since the moment when Vučić came to power, it became obvious that the student and civic protest emerged because not only students were there, they were joined by professors, high school students, secondary school teachers, barristers, and many others. And by the beginning of February, more than 300 places in Serbia had at least one protest, and only 25 of them have state faculties. So in others, someone else leads the protest. And who is that? Civic activists, political parties, associations. Student Zoomers, Gen Z, that was already mentioned, surprised everyone by their determination, energy, and commitment, and infected many others with their qualities. They organized themselves in the plenums, it literally means plenary sessions, and decided to implement direct democracy in them. All the suggestions the students of a particular faculty have must be confirmed by their plenum. I have been conducting a research only with the participants of the plenum, with a colleague from my faculty. It means that from each plenum, I need to have specific permit to go there, to address them, and then the second permit to submit questionnaires to them. And they can, of course, counsel me during that process. They can say, look, we don't want this questionnaire for this or that reason. And actually, one plenum decided that we can publish the results of our survey only after blockades are over, and we, as researchers, had to accept that. So I cannot really speak about our preliminary results, but what I can say is something that is known outside of our research. The research hopefully will be publicly available in June or perhaps later if blockades continue. But what is important is that every plenum elects chairperson for every session, and therefore there are no leaders of the movement. In January 2025, our colleagues from the Faculty of Philosophy, sociologists, they conducted a survey with all the students. So not only, we do only research with those who participate in plenums, but they did survey among all the students of in Belgrade, and 85%, not only in Belgrade, but all state universities, and 85% of them supported student blockades and therefore demands, irrespectively whether they took part in it or not. Merely 2.5% of them participated in any activity of any political party or any political organization. And this leads us to a very important context in which the student revolt, student protest erupted. It is that partitocracy in Serbia delegitimized the very notion of political parties among Zoomers and millennials who massively avoid to take part in activities of political parties. And that is why in the previous surveys, this led many of us, including myself, to wrongly believe that the generation of Zoomers in Serbia was passive, disinterested in social change, and very interested to leave the country. Or to put in psychoanalytic terms, we have projected our own problems of slightly cynical members of Gen X and baby boomers into Zoomers. The ongoing protest has revealed a totally different reality. And now I would like to try to explain, because we are doing two surveys. One is publicly available. We are also analyzing slogans, all slogans that they use. And of course, go with them in their marches, protests, etc. So this is more anthropological approach. So what have we revealed so far? Well, except this general observation that the student protest has incredible energy and very, very incredible speed of reaction, which the state cannot cope with. What is important is their mapping of freedom. When students announced that they would block central traffic routes in Belgrade, the Autocom and the junction, it looked very strange to older generations, those who clearly supported the student protest, but they were very skeptical what would happen. And it sounded even stranger when they said that they would walk on foot from Belgrade to Novi Sad at the end of January and then to Kragujevac on the statehood day. But actually, they did something very, very peculiar with all of that. The marches from Belgrade to Novi Sad and on the statehood day from various university centers in Serbia to Kragujevac are extremely important for the symbolic mapping of freedom. With those marches, the student protest maps a new Serbia that self-identifies itself as a Serbia liberated from fear. The first act was a rally at Autokomanda. It happened on a symbolic day, St. Sava Day, and it is a zone from St. Sava Church to this junction, several hundred meters. And this zone was symbolically created and was symbolically liberated from fear. It was an all-day event, including for students spending night there. And what happened during the day was that procession after procession followed, and each procession included students or senior high school students representing different faculties, grammar schools, and every procession was applauded. And in that way, they symbolically became citizens of that free zone. It was also a spectacle of diversity and the proof that Serbia liberated from fear had room for everyone. There were students with very different lifestyles, artists, professors, bikers, farmers, even elite war veterans. There were those who were visibly queered, but also those who preferred military style. All of them were there. And the slogans, although they are more or less within liberalism, they also varied from Che Guevara through liberalism to patriotic messages. People who were gathered there, groups that appeared there, were very remarkable, and they demonstrated something that we noticed in 2024 during two big civic protests, Serbia Against Violence and another protest against the exploitation of lithium. And it is that civic activism can mobilize many more people, many more groups, many more citizens than any political party or group of opposition political parties. So the level of dissatisfaction against the regime is actually much higher than the level that opposition political parties could articulate. In the marches that followed, even more importantly, student marches, every place the student passed through, anthropologically speaking, I will use a Dutch-French anthropologist, they participated in the rite of passage. what does it mean? You had students going on foot from Belgrade to Novi Sad, and along that route, they were greeted in every single place by locals, and those locals told us how they felt when students passed. So they told us that they felt relieved, that they felt different, that something very dramatically changed in their lives. So what we heard from them is that they felt that they acquired freedom. They felt that they were liberated. I interviewed some of those who marched, and they told me that locals in Novi Sad greeted them as liberators, some who obviously cannot really remember 1945, compared it to the liberation from Nazi Germany. Some people cried when students appeared, and many were in ecstatic state. There was a clear sense of catharsis among those who came to greet students in how they described what happened. And it is difficult, really difficult, to find anything similar in the recent political history of Serbia, anything with which we could compare the importance of these marches, and their symbolic potential is huge, and we still cannot analyze it fully. Finally, Kragujevac came. It was something that the students selected for the statehood day, which is also the Constitution Day of a very liberal constitution from 1835 that was based on French and Swiss models, but that the conservative powers of that age immediately suspended. So this statehood day was taken by the students as something very important for them symbolically. And therefore, this march to Kragujevac added another aspect, and again, places on the route greeted them with incredible enthusiasm. But symbolically, they embraced constitutionalism, which was a bitter reminder that Serbia, even 190 years after its first liberal constitution, still has serious problems with constitutionalism. Another very important thing, students from Novi Pazar joined for the first time. Novi Pazar is a Bosniak town, a Muslim town dominantly. And you could see students together, some of them veiled, female students who came there, who participated with their counterparts. So this is another spectacle of diversity, something very important, something obviously Gen Z can do much better than older generations. Now the question is, okay, this is what happened anthropologically, but where is the transformation? First of all, the transformation, this is not the student protest anymore. This is the student and civic protest. As I said, there are 300 towns participating in it. So it has student core, which is absolutely the motor of everything. Without that motor, everything would collapse. But there is much, much wider layer around it. Secondly, there is a liberation of institution. It already happened in the field of culture because actors stood up, opera singers stood up, people who are employed in various institutions stood up. For the first time, they signed petitions. They said, we support the students. Specialists have become more serious. Serbia's president complained that no one wants to sign anymore construction permits just like that, that he cannot open now already completed railroad, fast railroad, the same that actually where the tragedy happened, but this time from Novi Sad to Subotica, because now specialists are much more careful, they check everything, etc. The regime is unable to continue its political show. So for instance, this is something that Zana already mentioned, but one of the obvious cases happened recently. Serbia's president said he would organize a counter rally in Novi Sad after this march of students that ended up in Novi Sad. He didn't. He obviously assessed that it was too dangerous. He said that he would appear in Novi Sad for 15 minutes. This is something that students do every day, participating in these rituals of mourning. He didn't appear. So in the past, whatever he said in his political show was actually realized. On municipal level, there is a clear sense of the loss of legitimacy all around Serbia, and there are demands that mayors should submit resignations, and we will see what will happen. And finally, the most important thing is that the difference between voters and supporters has become crucial and clear. So the ruling party with this partitocratic system has voters, but when you have protest, when you have people in the streets, voters are not enough. You must have supporters. The ruling party obviously does not have too many supporters, because when they want to organize counter rallies, they have real problems with that. And to summarize, without giving my own summary, I was surprised to read in Neue Zürcher Zeitung an article very positively surprised by Andreas Ernst on February the 11th, in which he actually said something that is very similar to my conclusions so far. And this is what he said. He replies to skeptics who believe that the change of power in Serbia is impossible under Vučić. And this is what Ernst says. The skeptics are missing something. This movement is already a great success. It politicizes an entire generation of young people. It is a generation that was considered passive and apolitical. Their greatest ambition seemed to be to emigrate to Europe. Although this movement has not yet changed the system, those in actions have. They have lost their fear. They are learning to sharpen their opinions in debates, and thanks to organization, are able to achieve concrete goals. Protest is a school of democracy. It turns its participants into citizens. And I think that this conclusion is something that describes the situation and where we are now very well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Slobodan. Let's now give word to David Makarin. He will talk about student protests in Serbia seen by one of its participants.
Hi, first of all, I want to thank you in my name and name of all the students for giving us the opportunity to talk with people outside of Serbia and to explain with more details what's going on in our country. I think that the speakers already covered basically everything, so I'm not going to be that long, but I would like to point out that as someone who participates in the protests, it's really important to actually point out that the cause of student blockades was obviously a downfall of canopy in Novi Sad, which killed 15 people and left 2 people seriously injured. But I would say that the consequence was violence against students of Faculty of Dramatic Arts, in which were involved even members of leading party, Serbian Progressive Party. And one of them is actually a city councillor of New Belgrade, which was not till this day questioned by the police, or there's not any investigation against him. And when the blockades, it was Faculty of Dramatic Arts that actually, I would say, formed these demands, and none of them is still fulfilled. I would like to point out that also, this accident raised concerns about the structural integrity of public infrastructure and potential corruption in its maintenance. Our president made a statement regarding the collapse of newly renovated station in Novi Sad, where he even confessed that the structure wasn't finished. And the structure wasn't finished while it was in the use. So I would like to point out, sorry, I have the idea of student plenums. As you know, we have plenums in our universities where we decide and where everyone is invited. The idea of student plenums originated in response to the government's lack of accountability. plenums have been an effective and I would say historical methods allowing people to collectively discuss, deliberate, and take actions. There were many protests, and one of them, and first protest was actually in front of national television, which wasn't even talking about what happened in the beginning. They weren't talking and inviting students. So we were in front of the national television where we asked for, well, first of all, objectively, to invite students and objectively talk about the situation in Serbia. And till this day, they, I would say, are still not doing their jobs. They are influenced by, I would say, leading parties' propaganda. And when our president, let's say, is talking, all of the televisions are streaming his talk. But when something is happening with students, there is, I would say, not really. We have no media freedom, and I would say that we have, as I said, no. So I'm not sure what I could say more. I could say, of course, about protests that have occurred and happened in Slavia, where thousands of people have gathered and we were all together. Other groups, civil groups, have joined our protests, and I want to give time for a debate. And as I said, my speakers have already covered it all. At the end, I would like to point out Abraham Lincoln and say that the best way to predict the future is to create it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I'm sure that there will be lots of questions, maybe also to you in the Q&A. And now, very briefly, actually, first, Dietmar, if you could maybe give some comments, and then I will also ask some questions, and then we will, have time for a discussion. We still have some time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much to all four of you for this interesting talks and presentations, and full of insights and optimism to my mind. Hvala vam. Now, instead, as Una said already, instead of a comment, I rather opened the conversation with two specific questions. So when it comes to the relationship between Serbia and the European Union, there is much talk about stabilitocracy, as Slobodan already mentioned, when von der Leyen and Chancellor Scholz are cozying or are friendly with Vučić in the name of stability and predictability. Has, to your feeling, to your mind, anything changed in this respect recently? So since November last year. The second question is related more to internal Serbian policies, and Ivan addressed it already in a way. So what's the relation between the groups that call for and organize these demonstrations and the political parties in opposition? Is there a collaboration, a common strategy, or will the movement remain as exceptional as Sona has described it so aptly? So will it remain extra parliamentarian, or will it join with parties from the opposition, or will it turn itself into a political party? Thanks a lot.
Thank you a lot, Dietmar. I will also have one very general question as well. I was wondering, and also kind of connecting various moments of the presentations, also symbolism, political ramifications, and also new subjectivity. And I really need to ask this question, actually, because I would be interested to know more what you think about exactly this sort of symbolism that we see and the protests that include Serbian flags and other flags as well, including also Kosovo is Serbia, or yeah, the flag I'm referring to. So I was actually at one of the discussions when one student from Kosovo actually asked and was asking about the future of these protests and this sort of like new, like who, like what are, like, you know, he was kind of worried about the future, whether they are too nationalist, and then there was this discussion about different kind of nationalism. So I was just kind of a very broad question about this sort of symbolism that we see and sort of yeah, thanks. And maybe the speakers can give their answers or reflections, ask each other, and then we can open for everyone as well in the public.
Well, I can respond to your question about symbolism, and because I'm one of the participants, I can tell you that due to, I would say, this theory that our government is giving to people that we are involved by some and paid by some outside of Serbia, we strictly, I would say, stay with flags of Serbia, of course, and that's of course. I mean, there is a shared opinion about European Union due to, I would say, lack of reaction when it comes to Vučić and his regime, and a lot of people in Serbia have lost their faith in European Union due to that situation. But when it comes to my opinion, I would say that I still support Serbia joining European Union, and I have participated in many debates when it comes to that. So yeah, I would like to say I understand about whole Kosovo situation. That's still a really sensitive topic for, I would say, people in Kosovo and people in Serbia. So it's a shared opinion, and it's a, I would say, much deeper story and history. So yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll start with Dietmar's questions. So yes, things have changed. First of all, there is new commissioner for enlargement, and there is new commissioner for common foreign policy. And the previous commissioner for enlargement was former Orban's ambassador. And Orban is the favorite politician to Vučić and Vučić to Orban. So it was it's very different now. Rapporteur for Serbia, the previous one was from EPP. The current one is Tonino Picula. Foreign affairs of the EU were conducted by a Spaniard. Spain has special relations with Serbia, shares the same opinion about Kosovo, Catalonia, etc. But the new one is Estonian, so much more focused on NATO and other things that are really not a strength of Vučić. So those things have changed. The second point is that out of 4 leading parliamentary groups that create majority, pro-European groups, 3, Social Democrats, Renew, and the Greens, openly supported the students and condemned the way how Vučić regime reacted to in the first weeks of all of that. So things have changed. And finally, the most obvious change is in the coverage of Western media, which Western media are increasingly sympathetic to the student movement. I quoted one of those articles, but not only Neue Zürcher Zeitung. There are excellent pieces in The Guardian, even in the Fox News, you wouldn't believe. CNN as well. So things really have, in that sense, changed dramatically. And they have changed so dramatically that now, for the first time in the last 10 years, we who are dealing with democratization are more moderate in assessing Serbian regime than the Western journalists, because we still stick to these characterization by Freedom House. It's a hybrid regime, semi-autocratic, but in now majority of articles written by Western journalists, they call Serbia autocracy, Serbian leader autocratic, authoritarian, etc. We would always say semi-authoritarian, semi-autocratic, etc. We would be more nuanced in that sense. So this is really a dramatic change. And this has happened in the last 4 weeks, not before that. Because it took also what is happening in Europe, polycrisis that is happening in Europe, of course, limits possibilities to focus what's happening here. So I would say we discussed it. I discussed it with some other colleagues, also some related to IVM Institute, from which is Ivan, and they also share this opinion with me that having in mind what kind of problems Europe has, we are actually surprised with the level of coverage. So that has changed dramatically. And fine, but of course, EPP is still very inconsistent. But I think that in several days, when Merz becomes chancellor, which is almost certain, I think one of the things that he will certainly have in mind is who supported AfD. And in Europe, that's Orban, and who flirted with AfD, and these are certain parties from Serbia. So not so openly like Orban, but still they flirted. So I think that for Chancellor Merz, there will be a bit different vision. And I think that the question of the rule of law, democracy, will be much more priority than before, because now it's obvious how important it is for Europe. So that has really dramatically changed. And in my opinion, the rally in Berlin against possible right-wing coalitions is the turning point, maybe, for European political landscape. Finally, Una's question, it is about, yes, I would define student protests and students and their view as constitutional patriotism. So I think what they want to say is we need to respect the constitution. There are 46 articles in the Serbian constitution that define minority rights, human rights, and liberties. So it's quite well written. It's not respected, but it's quite well written. And what is, for me, very fascinating is that in that kind of definition, everyone can find reasons to join it. So I think that what the student protest has done is something that no one was able to done previously in Serbia. It is to find the smallest common denominator that could mobilize the whole potential of the civic protest. And waving with the Serbian flag is waving with the symbol of the state and not the symbol of the nation. That is how I see it. And if you want to improve state institutions, then that is what you should do. But students sing very often this hymn by Dositej Obradović, the leading figure of the Serbian Enlightenment, Serbia Resurrect. And that is very Enlightenment-based song. So they are sending this message, I would say, very much attached to certain Enlightenment tradition, and that is also inclusive. If it could not be seen as inclusive, then you wouldn't see all those students of different confessions, different groups coming there. Obviously, they all feel very comfortable to come. So I think they have, for local circumstances, created the best possible inclusive platform. I was at 7 plenums, and what I am the most impressed about is the level how inclusive they are and the level how tolerant they are. that is very different from us in JET X. We don't discuss with that level of tolerance at our faculty meetings. So what I say when my colleagues ask me, I say, go there, ask them to allow you to be present at the plenum. You will learn how to behave tolerantly and inclusively.
Thanks a lot. Ivan, please. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. To the questions that Dietmar posed, I think one thing that I wanted to say, and then because of time didn't, I think what's important is to understand the broader context again of where the Western world is. And by that, I mean that it was easier to leave the country with your diploma because things were going pretty well. Now the world isn't going pretty well. And I think that's part of the, if I can sort of put myself into the shoes of the students, it's not easy to leave and find a job. Maybe if you're an IT, AI guy or gal, you can do that. But the decision to stand your ground and say, no, this is our country, we want to stay here, we want to make it better, is the key of this movement, obviously. And going back to the rule of law is fundamental. Those two things, stay here and let's make our country decent again. And I think this decision to not have any other flags than the Serbian one, and I think Slobodan explained that very well just now about constitutional patriotism, is a deliberate one. And that is where Vučić's regime and Vučić find it hard to put their hand on this movement and to accuse them of, because he has accused them of foreign intervention, and all of us of foreign intervention. This is why I say there's a cleansing. And that means it's not against the European Union, it's the understanding we must do this ourselves. Nobody will help us if we do not show the determination to make our society democratic based on the rule of law. And then the European Union, which my generation also said, it's about us, this is about changing us. We are geographically lucky to be in Europe. The fact that there's a European Union can help, but the homework, it behooves us to do this. And I think the students have taken this to a whole new level. Let's do it, and then the European Union will come as a cherry on top. And I get very many questions, and where's the European Union in this? I said, wait, we are sorting, the students and the society are sorting themselves out first, and then will come. And I must add, and this has been said, when Ursula von der Leyen comes to Belgrade and says, dear Alexander, meaning Alexander Vučić, you're doing great reforms here, everyone's eyes roll over, no matter what generation are, because people are living there, we know what's happening, and you simply cannot gloss over the fact that this is simply untrue. And that is said by Scholz when he came, that was said by Macron. And so basically the writing on the wall has been read by people. And I think that's very important to understand. This is the fact that there are no EU flags does not mean that it is against the EU. This will come in due time. And as far as the European press following it, I think the trigger for change was, as usually happens, in media attention, is when the prime minister resigned. Then that sort of jumped on the screen of everyone's newscast. Wait a minute, why is the prime minister resigning? And so attention was brought forward. And I think we're seeing this press, which is much better given everything else. On the most difficult question of Dietmar, students' opposition party, that's part of, as the EU is not part of it, they don't want any contact for the moment. I don't know anything, but there must be some very lateral contacts. The opposition parties are having problem coming together. The one thing that they have agreed upon apparently is to make the students' demands their own demands. That is one thing they've all agreed on. Beyond that, nothing yet has come forward, but I think time will tell and show us where this is going. But eventually there will have to be a political manifestation that will appear.
Thanks a lot. Zona, would you like to respond to maybe Dietmar's questions or yeah?
Sure, I believe they've been answered by people more competent than me, definitely. There's also a question from Nino Gozalishvili in the chat that could maybe kind of be related to it about the place national identity is taking in the protests. And I think David first has already given us the answers, and his are obviously the best. And I would just like to follow up with the idea of how claiming the Serbian flag and Serbian identity is done in a non-nationalistic way, but in a way that is, like I mentioned in my talk, a refusal of an auto-colonial mentality that waits for an external savior, and also a very smart logistical move so that the current regime could not call the protests, even though it still does, anti-Serbian and so on. The construction of cosmopolitanism as a place emerging and calling others to join is interesting as well, because that's often discredited as elitists. Cosmopolitans are elitists, but in a way, the Serbian protests are a universal for the region, because they are awakening similar kind of reactions in Croatia, Bosnia, and other former Yugoslavia countries, precisely because of the same vulnerabilities, the same sufferings that they are talking about and that they are asking the others to join in. So there's nothing nationalistic, nothing elitist about them. And that is, like so many of their moves, all worthy and incredibly successful.
Thank you. Any questions or anyone wants? So Nino posed. Balázs?
Yeah, I wanted to ask exactly I mean, after all, this whole project is about transnational connectivities, and I agree with that there is this kind of instant inspiratory or inspirational element as well. That's quite clear that in the former Yugoslav space there is a kind of resonance already with this. But I would like to roll back a little bit the time machine and think about the last 10 or even 15 years, because I think there were quite similar movements or demonstrations in quite different places. I mean, like even in my native Hungary, there were quite significant student movements which were kind of morphologically quite different, which were, by the way, inspired to a certain extent by Croatian student movements that were occupying the university campus. So there is a longer history behind this. Yes, I mean, like this is not. I mean, I don't want to go back to 1968 or anything like that. But it's clear that there is this kind of like anti-systemic, use-driven alternative political movements that are kind of not fitting into the traditional left and right, not fitting into the party system, stuff like that. Now, the lesson, if I can draw any kind of lesson from the previous movements, was, however, is that exactly what we are now praising, that is that these movements were kind of trying to get out of the traditional logic of party politics. They were refusing very heavily the political infrastructure. It also meant that they had very, if you want, pre-political behavior. They had very limited kind of agency when it came to navigating between the existing political forces, and then their transformative impact was actually in most of the cases, I mean, like in most of these anti-corruption movements or student movements kind of at some point died out. So like there are very few, I mean, like there are some which actually ended up with toppling the government, but even when toppling the government, like Slovak case, for example, Romanian case is complicated, they might have not produced a qualitative change. Yes, I mean, they might have contributed to a kind of exchange between different political forces on the top, to which they were not connected, and at some point they were kind of losing their impact, partially because the political system was exactly detached from this movement. So I would like to ask a little bit, I mean, I don't want to ask it retrospectively to kind of analyze what happened, but like rather prospectively, that how do we imagine what kind of society and what kind of politics and what kind of institutional system might emerge from this? Because it's one thing to have a kind of, how to say, present of the revolutionary dynamic that Ivan and Zona and David or described and Slobodan all very, very eloquently, that there is this kind of, if you want, historical sublime in this moment of the revolutionary agency. But then the question is still, where does it go? I mean, what kind of society, what kind of constitution, what kind of political order these actors are actually aiming at? And if they don't really have a common picture, exactly because there is this, in a way, tolerance that accepts quite different political positions, then how far this can actually have a common, let's say, transformative impact.
Thank you. Would somebody like to respond first? Feel free just to unmute yourself and.
Well, let me take a stab at Balázs's very important and complex question. I mean, if you look at the trajectory of the post-communist countries after '89, you know, the kind of high flight of all the countries, the model countries of Poland and Hungary, and then what happened afterwards. Looking ahead here, I think, you know, not to be too realistic about things, but what we can aspire is to get to some level of consolidation of democracy, and that the question of the rule of law is not contested, that, you know, we get some form of a Laura Kövesi dealing with at least some of the key corruption issues. And, you know, I like to say when Boris Tadic, the predecessor to this regime from basically 2008, 2012, you know, one could feel pretty okay walking the streets of Serbia and its cities. Yes, of course, we knew there was corruption. We knew there was influence on certain media, but at least it was not anything that you didn't see in some other countries, and that some things were being dealt with, but that it needed to move forward. I'd like to make a broader point here, and that is, you know, for a whole other panel discussion, and that what is the responsibility of social democratic governments that preceded the Orbáns, the Kaczynskis, the Vučićes, or in Romania? I think they did not stand up to the test of moving more forcefully towards elements of consolidation of democracy. And I think there's a lot of responsibility there for what happened later, because people were trying out different ways of moving forward. You know, as our friend Ivan Krastev used to say back for Bulgaria, voters were engaged in casino voting. You know, you try the red color, you try the black color, you try number 7, you try number 8. You're trying to find someone who will actually live up to your expectations on the rule of law, and somehow things don't work up. I mean, look at Bulgaria. Not the most happy country, with a turnout in elections that was sort of around 30% the last time. So, you know, the kind of examples that we have ahead of us are not bright. But to go back to what Zona said in the end, you know, maybe we are the harbinger of way of things, of how we go forward. We'll all have to roll up our sleeves. You know, nothing happens without us, the citizens, we the people, and if we have the stamina to do it, and again, we didn't say it, but we're all aware of it, the deeply troubling demographic situation in all of our countries, of an aging population, of low birth rates, of young people still leaving. You know, we talked about a region of about 18 million people. I think we're well below 16 million as a region. The other thing I'd like to mention is that somebody used the term klepto-nationalism. I don't know how old that is in our field of political science, but I think it speaks well to Vučić. You whip up nationalist emotions against all your neighbors and against anyone else. And while everyone is frenzied about, my goodness, do they hate us and will they attack us? You are kind of filling your pocket on this. And I think this regime has been a master using the tabloids and the media to, you wake up in the morning and don't know who's the greatest enemy. Is it Croatia or Montenegro or NATO or Germany or USAID or NED or, this constant rising of political emotions against others, so you do not focus on what's actually happening domestically. So I like to stress that fact, and I think that's important when we're talking about transnationalism. In my kind of ideal dreams, we really have to bring the temperature in our bilateral relations and regionally to a lower level, and that was happening under Tadić. The Serbian-Croatian relationships were really moving along at that moment. They are not now. And finally, as a footnote, as far as I can see, but I stand to be denied here, is that Kosovo has not been an issue at all. Because to put it a bit brutally, I think Vučić has basically given away Kosovo as we knew it, because that is one of the promises that he gave to Westerners when he came to power.
Thank you. Any responses or any other questions from the audience?
Well, I'll try just to say a few things, although very cautiously. I think that this very fact of constitutional liberalism places the movement within classical liberalism, not, of course, what today is called liberalism, because it can be anything, including neoliberalism. This is very far from it. So I think that there are certain socialist ideas, which are not necessarily socialist, could be also considered liberal. For instance, that all education should be free. You can see that idea in the movement, but actually Germany and many other countries have it. It can be part of social capitalism. So I think it will be within liberalism what will probably be articulated, but I think that it will also be combined, because we need to be aware of this civic component, that civic layer. It will be joined by ecologism, and there I should be very careful, because ecologism can be anywhere. It can be to the right, to the left, or anywhere else. It doesn't necessarily need to be like classical Greens, left-leaned, but ecologism will be there because simply there is a succession of free movements: Serbia against violence, movement against lithium, exploitation of lithium, and now the student movement. So simply this ecological potential that was raised only several months ago is still there. And one of the things which fortunately the student movement brought about is that Western media for the first time write openly that majority of the citizens of Serbia are against the exploitation of lithium, especially in the way as Olaf Scholz suggested it. And then, it reduces pressure to Serbia, because no Western company or international company will come to a country where there will be very, very huge public outcry against that company, daily demonstrations, protests, etc. And now the Western press openly writes about it for the first time. So I think all these things will be combined: liberalism, ecologism, and some of the sensibilities of Gen Z that Zona mentioned. One is what I would say, they are a kind of revolutionaries who are politically correct. So something that is contradictio in adjecto. You wouldn't say that that's possible, but it's actually possible. And that's why they are acceptable for everyone: liberals, conservatives, socialists. for different reasons. So there will be sensibilities included in this of Gen Z, but I think politically it will be within very broad spectrum of classical liberalism.
Thank you. Any other responses? Oh, we have a question from, but I can read the question in the chat box, in the chat. So from team, as Trump rushes to embrace Putin's talking points, then surely Vučić can hang on a bit, and soon we have support from Grenell and Blagojevic, etc., about color revolution, etc.
Not Una Blagojevic, of course.
Not Una, no, probably.
But Rod Blagojevic.
Yes.
Tim, very pointed question. I mean, we basically, as we've all said, it's uncertainty with Trump. We see a bit where this is going, and it's surprisingly, astonishingly horrible. I mean, to sort of be throwing Ukraine under the bus like that. It's very hard to see what the politics on the Balkans will be apart from real estate development in Albania and Serbia by Jared Kushner. We're still waiting to see the results, the full results of the Kosovo election. We know that Albin Kurti is not the favorite of Grenell in particular. So very hard to express any prognosis here. Frankly, apart from the fact that I repeat again, you know, USAID, Vučić can now freely say that USAID is a criminal organization, and you know, I'm sure there have already been many posts on various platforms showing Vučić standing in front of a banner of USAID, opening various programs that USAID opened during these 12 years while he's been in power. So. I think hanging on, he is hoping for the best, but as I said, I really can't express myself as to where U.S. policies on this particular issue are going. But maybe Slobodan or Zona have different views.
Well, I think that the most important thing is that Serbia has the European Union as the main trading partner, about 65%, plus about 20% coming from CEFTA, Central European Free Trade Organization, which is under the umbrella of the EU. So indirectly or directly, the EU is connected with 85% of Serbian exports and imports. Exports to Russia are totally irrelevant. Imports will soon be close to zero if even gas will be imported in some other way. Also, import and exports from America are not very big. So what's the leverage of America? It is about resolving the Kosovo issue. Only America can resolve it, no one else. But they will resolve it in their own way, with or without participation of the locals, obviously, if they decide that that is important to do. What is very characteristic is that Trump had meetings with those who supported him, with Giorgia Meloni, with Viktor Orban, with Argentinian president. But we haven't so far seen any contacts, high-level contacts with Serbian officials. So it doesn't really look as spectacular as they would like to present it. And also Grenell's tweet was very nuanced, but not everyone read the whole tweet, because tweet also had one reply and then Grenell's reply to that reply. So if you take it all together, yes, he said there, if the government is to be changed, it must be changed peaceful, institutional, etc. I think that's something that everyone agrees about. So it wasn't really a full-scale endorsement. And so we will see what will happen. Just for the time being, nothing spectacular happened. And I think less than Mr. Vučić expected for the time being.
Thank you. Any final reflections on the question, as it's already 7, sadly, but I just wanted to ask, and yeah, if not, I would really like to thank all the participants and panelists once again. Thank you for also the questions. It was really, really lovely having you all. And yeah, thanks a lot. I don't know if Balázs or Dietmar would like to say something at the end, but thank you for this a lot.
The only thing is that we will try to organize similar one on Ukraine in the next 3 weeks or something like that. So stay tuned, and we would like to say thanks once again in the name of all the STEP organizers to all 4 panelists and all the big group who came together. And we hope that, I think at some form, this will be available online also later on, so people can watch it who were not part of this now. So thanks once again. And
thank you.
Vidimo se.
Vidimo se. Ciao. And Una,
Ciao.
thank you very much for taking care of the...
Of course.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Ciao.